Woodcock Airport is an abandoned airstrip 3.8 nautical miles or 7 kilometers northeast of Cedarvale, British Columbia. Woodcock Airport was built in the 1940s as a detachment of RCAF Air Station Smithers. After the Second World War, the airstrip was briefly maintained for emergencies. After Pearl Harbor, British Columbians became concerned about preparedness for an attack on the West Coast. As protection for the coast, squadrons of RCAF aircraft moved west. Airfields were constructed. A further second line of defense called for airports in the BC interior at Woodcock, Smithers, Vanderhoof, Prince George, Quesnel, Williams Lake, and Dog Creek. This field, and others on the staging route, potentially formed a second line of defense to be used in an extreme emergency should an enemy gain a foothold on the BC coast. On short notice, fighter aircraft could be operated defensively from these stations. Woodcock was constructed in 1943 as an emergency airfield between Smithers and Terrace for aircraft operating visually from Prince George west to the coastal stations. It was built by the Department of National Defense as part of the Home War establishment. Preliminary clearing at the site, 44 miles north-northeast of the Terrace Airport, began in spring 1942. On September 24, 1942, an RCAF Norseman with floats, operating from Terrace, made a series of photographic overflights of the Woodcock Airfield site, as well as at Kitwanga. Before the onset of winter, airfield preparation by a national defense contractor had been completed. Preliminary runway preparation was underway, but due to heavy snowfall, work came to a halt in the winter of 42-43. An aerodrome maintenance crew and a defense unit were stationed there throughout the winter, but for duty purposes only. The RCAF station diary reports that on May 1, 1943, the runway had not been completed. Again on June 1st, the diary records that all buildings and structures, except for the wireless building, were 50% complete. Work had started on the sewage plant. On August 22nd, a Beechcraft 18 Expediter landed. This Department of Transport aircraft brought 2 DOT inspectors. They assessed the conditions of RCAF Woodcock and its facilities. They left after a visit of under an hour. The following day, an RCAF Cessna crane landed. On August 24th, a telegram was received from RCAF Patricia Bay, Victoria, advising Woodcock to expect a Bolingbrook for photographic work over the station. The morning of August 26th, the Bolingbrook left Smithers and flew to Terrace to photograph the RCAF station there, then on to Woodcock for more photos. The aircraft landed and after a short stay returned to Smithers. About 2 weeks later, on September 7th, another RCAF photographic aircraft, a Ventura, passed overhead en route to RCAF Annette Island in Alaska. The Ventura returned and landed at Woodcock on September 9th. The crew overnighted at the station. In late afternoon on September 18, 1943, an RCAF Goose made what might be termed a pit stop at the Woodcock station on its way to Terrace. On September 22nd, A Department of Transport aircraft, a Lockheed 12, landed at RCAF Woodcock. The next day, September 23rd, an RCAF Cessna Crane landed and departed, and on the following day, the RCAF Goose returned. This was the last station diary record, except for a notation on September 30th, 1943. It reads, quote, "Cloudy and cool. Heavy snow noticeable on surrounding mountain peaks," unquote. RCAF Station Woodcock would become number 15 staging unit. Operations were unrecorded from October 1st, 1943 to March 31st, 1944, with one exception. A brief mention of the crash of an RCAF Hurricane on December 21st, 1943 at Kitwanga. At the end of the Second World War, Woodcock Airfield passed from the Department of National Defense to the Department of Transport. The paved runway, 5,200 feet by 200 feet, continued to be used for emergencies only. By aircraft experiencing weather-related difficulties en route to Smithers through the narrow Skeena River Valley between Terrace and Hazelton. The airport is on the north side of the Skeena River, about 4 miles from Cedarvale. Road access to the airport requires crossing the highway bridge at Kitwanga and driving southwest on the north side of the Skeena River for 13 miles. In later years, the westerly end of the runway was displaced, reducing the available length to 3,350 feet. In 1969, the Terrace Skydiving Club took over maintenance and used it until 2004. The runway had been overgrown by vegetation until May 2019, when the British Columbia General Aviation Association staged a cleanup. It was most recently used in March 2022 by an Albanian college student who used it for experimental purposes. In recent decades, the runway has become saturated with moss and saplings. Occasionally, local pilots pick their way through the overgrowth and use the airstrip to enjoy the remote backcountry and to fish in the Skeena River.